It's time for Art Attitude. I'm Wendy Butler. Low art, high craft, and exquisite spatulas. No, it's not a cookbook. It's Mike Craghead's book about art, and further, his inquiry into what he considers the barriers that separate individuals from art and from each other. Is this book an homage to Robert Pirsig? No, but Mike really cares about two of Pirsig's books, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, an inquiry into values, published in 1974, and Pirsig's 1991 book, Lila, an inquiry into morals. And we're going to talk about this and much more. Mike Craghead is my guest. You talk about art education, and I was really interested in this section, and you can talk about it now, we can talk about it in a little while, but this has to do with your experience studying visual art, and I did not know you as a visual artist. So actually, let's talk about that. Mm-hmm. I only know you as a musician, and just in later years, I saw, your, pumpkin carving and
disease
and other things related to visual art. So you as a visual artist, but then you also write in your book about being fully engaged during your live music performances. So where does visual art, obviously I think that came first. Where is that for you?
I was always, from day one, I was always the art guy. It was always going to be art. I was, in school, I would always be drawing, and gathering a crowd sometimes because of those drawings. That's how I got sort of all of my validation as a kid. But then, and then I was going to be probably comic book artist, I thought at first, and then it was going to be graphic artist or whatever. And then, so I was an art major at UC Santa Cruz, and then on up at HSU at the time. I found after a certain point, once I started playing music when I was about 17, I'd always played the harmonica. I actually carried a harmonica in a knife case on my belt all through elementary school. Yes, I did. And but when I learned to play guitar at like age 17, that's when I was like, oh, this is a different experience, because the being in front of people, being held accountable in the moment, and delivering, for instance, a song I wrote, that's a lot like painting, because I paint by myself. You could put it up on a wall, then you can just go hide around the corner and you're not held immediately accountable. And then on the other end of it, I had taken enough acting classes at UC Santa Cruz that were Meisner technique, method acting stuff. And if you're doing that right, or at least, and I didn't go, I only took a few classes into it, but enough to sort of learn that secret of how to do that. And it was, when done properly, it just was terrifying. It was just like a little much for me as far as being just completely exposed if you're doing it properly. And I know there's ways to modulate that, and you can still not be insane. But for me, I was like, whoa, this is a little much. So, but music was a really like a perfect happy medium, where it was like, there's immediacy performing. I'm bringing something that I did basically by myself. The song I wrote is a lot like the painting that I'm delivering. And then the living in the moment that comes from acting is involved there, but it's in a really kind of safe spot. So that was why my warm and fuzzy place. And that part of it is part of what kind of led to my later maybe disillusionment with art as my whole thing. When before it was 100% going to be my whole thing. Plus, I was deluded enough to think like I'm going to be a multinational recording artist, because of course that was plan A.
Well, is it all right if we talk more about art education now, about something that I read in your book? Mm-hmm. You said that when you were in more advanced classes, mm-hmm. I'm thinking more geared toward people who specifically were going to get degrees in art, right. Rather than people who were taking it as a elective of some kind.
Mhm.
So discussion of art, you write, or you said your experience became more about what a student could say about it rather than about the art itself. Also, you say that the discussions about quote, quote, real art were frustrating at times. An instance where a fellow student was told perhaps that student wasn't making real art. Um, let's talk about why you thought it was important to include passages about art education and the whole process for students in your book.
Well, the the whole book is really a culmination of all of these years of kind of wrestling with where art belongs in my life and kind of observing what it does in the world in general. And it's always been really deeply important to me. So, like, have feeling the warm fuzzy feelings of performing music and acting, and sort of the quieter warm fuzzy feelings I would get from painting something or making a sculpture. I like ceramics most of all, like just making things out of clay. Um, that is a that you really can't. The more you talk about that the warm fuzzy feelings you get in your brain and other people do when they see it, the more you talk about that, the more impossible it is to describe properly. You have to start using really amorphous language, slippery term. You can't capture it because it has to be experienced. And there's something intrinsically human and like vital about that. It's so important. And so when I see anything being an obstacle to anyone in experiencing that, just you can call it joy. I keep calling it magic because that's a slippery enough term that I think it's the only one we have in the language, because it's you can put all kinds of overlays over it. You can put religion over it. You can put anything over it. It still kind of works because it can't fully be explained. It has to be experienced. So with art being that important, um, I've always I've always been really sensitive to the obstacles for for people experiencing it, and so it drives me crazy when you see I was so privileged to be able to have art classes all the time, um, and there's so many who just don't, and it's just it's crazy making. It makes me feel stabby, but the so as as an art major, one thing I noticed, and this is where one of the things that I think is more established in the world as a kind of an institution, is this idea of low art and high craft, and how we make all these divisions about what art is, and we define it so closely, and we actually, it's like etymology, like we put it into little slots, and we say this is this and this is this, and it's missing the point. So because the magic gets buried if you examine it too closely and put it in too many slots. So in school, the guy there was the the discussions of, like, at the end of a project, we'd put it all up on the wall, and we'd be able to talk to each other about what worked and what didn't and how to improve, and learning tips and tricks. And it was all very kind of loving and beautiful for everyone to be learning this thing together. Especially in the earlier classes, the lower division classes, which are full of math majors and other people who are just taking an art class. But I've noticed this really distinct shift when I got into the upper division in intermediate and advanced classes, where where it was all art majors, and so many of us were wrestling with what we can say about our art. What is the justification for it? What movement are we a part of? And it starts to be a big long text that you need in order to properly understand our art. And I always felt like that was weird and wrong, to have all of this text that has to accompany the work. If the work doesn't say anything all by itself and it needs those words, that always struck me as weird. And it came up in that class where it was a welding class, and the assignment was build a box, and we were given, they probably still do this because it's a brilliant assignment, where you're given a bunch of plate steel and a bunch of 1/4 inch steel rod, and the build a box, and that's a really nice wide open thing, but it has a parameter. So everybody did what they did, and I did like a figure sculpture drawing in midair with the 1/4 inch rod, which is really fun. But I was very much into figure sculpture, so I did a whole figure holding a wire frame metal box, and everybody else did something different. But there was one guy in the class that made, it was a functioning grill, like a little barbecue. It's beautiful. It had like indigenous basketry patterns along it, and salmon, and like all of these beautiful ornamentation, but it was functional. And because it was functional, the conversation about how beautiful it was very quickly turned into, what is art? Oh, is it art? It's functional, therefore it's not art. And I've always thought that was really silly. It's just profoundly silly. So no, wait. This is, what about this is any less cool than some painting you saw or some sculpture that's just for art's sake? The fact that you could do something with it somehow detracts, and that's been around for centuries, that notion, and I've always found it to be really silly. So that's one of the things that since this book is everything I always say about art to all my victims of this conversation, that had to go in there as well, because art is so important, and the magic of it. It really bums me out when people miss that. So the obstacle of categorizing art as functional and therefore not art, that's one of the things that, that's frustrating to me as a human, understanding the magic of it, and seeing that as, people unable to access that because of that obstacle.
This is Art Attitude. I'm Wendy Butler. My guest is Mike Craghead. We're talking about his book, Low Art, High Craft and Exquisite Spatulas, with the subtitle, Destroying the Barriers That Separate Us from Art and from Each Other.
Resonance. Resonance. You say that several times, many times through the book. So when something resonates with you, with an individual, I'm thinking resonance has to do with not only the person who makes art, but also the person who receives art, right? But resonance is a really important word to you. Why?
Well, the metaphor, like, again, in trying to describe something that's indescribable, the feeling you get when art hits you, or the feeling you get when you've made something that hits you in a certain way. That feeling reminds me of when you sing, and I talk about this in the book, beat the metaphor to death, in fact, that if you sing a note into a guitar, it'll vibrate the string. And that's a visual and audio, really kind of a good metaphor, I think, for what it feels like when I see art that I like, when it speaks to you somehow. And again, you have to use slippery language to talk about it. So resonance is kind of a more tangible version of like how you can tell that you're interacting with the magic aspect of it. So when something resonates with you, or that you made, or something that you're just as an audience member you're consuming, it really does feel that way. And you can't, when you're singing into a guitar, we know what's causing the resonance, but in art you really don't necessarily. It comes from, again, because I believe every metaphor should be beaten to death. The reason you resonate with a certain thing is because of how you're tuned. So if you sing the wrong note into a guitar, it's not going to do anything. If you sing a note that the string is tuned to, it is going to vibrate. And the tuning that we as humans go through in order to resonate with whatever we resonate with is everything we go through. It's who we are. It's how it's the sum of our experiences. It's our prejudices. It's our education. It might be genetic too. Like there's more than 1,000 different things that add up to the tuning and how we're tuned to interact with the world. And the resonance is everywhere, and that's how we interact with it, and it's all based on our tuning. So it's between, and that resonance can be just when you make something by yourself, there's something there, there's magic there. When you are just looking at a piece of art and don't know anything about the artist, there could be resonance between you and the work. Or if the artist, you happen to know about them, or they're right there performing, there's those three different things, the audience and the artist and the work, whatever it is. All of those three things can resonate together. And that's where crazy levels of magic can happen. Like that's where that concert you went to that you still remember, that giant experience, it really outgrows the sum of its parts. And I can't help but believe, and I have no proof of any of this, but I can't help believe that that's the most important thing about being human is it lives somewhere in there. Like that magic is, I feel like we owe it something. Like that's what we're all after. And so that's where resonance and tuning kind of work together, because that's how we interact with art and everything.
You quote and refer to author Robert Pirsig many times in the book, right? Both about his Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, and as well as about Lila.
Well, I was definitely in my teen years, actually, I was really kind of ravenously reading a bunch of, 70s and 80s books like, Castaneda, and I was, looking at a lot of philosophical stuff. And Pirsig was one of the ones that he sort of, my impression is, or at least the impression he's trying to get in the book, I don't know entirely how much of it is true, but it seems like he was really kind of cast aside by philosophy in general. And that can kind of be a red flag in some cases, where it's like, well, maybe it's just because you just don't know what you're talking about. But in his case, it really did feel a little like maybe he was addressing some of the sort of the pillars of what is believed to be philosophical thought, and that's why he was oppressed. So I'm not sure about that. We'll leave that to history. But what I liked about him is some of the very practical things that sort of made sense about, in particular, the indescribability of certain things. So he's talking about quality in the first book and how you can't really describe it, but you know what it is. And there's something about the way he talks about that really is exactly what I'm talking about with magic, because words always will fail. You cannot sum it up in words. And so he kind of spelled out that was kind of the groundwork for it. But in my book, it really made sense in describing something that's indescribable. And he did a good job of doing that, I think. Also, footnote, by the way, there's a great piece in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, probably Googleable, that's about gumption traps that I forced my kids to listen to a couple times. But it's I'll let your listeners look that up. But it's a very good way to manage your sort of personal mental reserves to do a task. It's really good, gumption traps. But then in Lila, the sequel, which I also criticized a bit of, because he kind of arguably was kind of a jerk in many ways. But in Lila, he takes these ideas of quality and kind of turns it into a whole metaphysics about how the whole universe works. And again, kind of the most logical, plausible explanation. So that's why it kind of, I kind of brought it into, as I'm trying to solve these artistic problems in my brain all these years, it kind of helped with that.
You mentioned your children, so I want to talk about this. So I want to go back to talk about some more passages in your book. But here, when I was, well, first of all, I had to look you up, in different on different sites because I'm going, okay, my Craghead trio. Wait a minute, we're talking 30 years ago was when I, first got
That can't be right, but sure.
no, first got to know you. No, when I first,
Yes.
okay, maybe not.
No, I mean 30 years. I refuse to accept that that's 7 years.
That I found, and I'm just going, wow, talk about time. I found a YouTube recording. You label it, it's on your website, of Monsters and Men Little Talks.
Mhm.
I didn't know anything about that. It was featuring you and your family. And so in your daughter is singing.
Mhm.
So I want you to talk about that recording just briefly, but also about about watching your children, create art.
Yeah. Well, I figured out as soon as as soon as I had kids, I realized they can carry my gear. Um, that's why you have those, right? But as they and this was largely Ronit Glick from Freshwater School. She's the music instructor there a while back, and she's just one of the most brilliant humans on earth, and very much can convey the joy in music. So I've seen her teach kids that were really resistant. I've seen her really set the light bulbs off, and help kids see the magic in art, and therefore it motivates them to learn music more. The magic in that music, and so yeah, all three of my kids had that privilege of learning from her, and my oldest Matt started, playing circles around me on guitar when he's probably 14 or so. It's just this annoying, YouTube. He can just okay, I'm going to go learn Santana now, and then you hear Santana noises out of the. It's like, come on, man. But it's amazing, and so as soon as that started happening, and he plays bass really well, and I played with the solo, and then the Mike Craghead trio with Eldon Green, who's just brilliant. And he was my bass player, believe it or not, but he would do guitar level solos during the show. It was crazy good. And the best saxophonist I've ever heard, the best guitarist I've ever heard, an amazing composer, and he recorded my records and everything. And then Bob Martinez on drums, so that was the Mike Craghead trio. Brilliantly witty name. There was three of us, but we were that was early '90s. And then so I played a lot with Sari Baker, who's an unbelievably good songwriter. She was actually at the folk festival the other day. And then as the kids got old enough, absolutely, I'd be like, hey, you want to come play? And they would, and made them carry the gear too, of course. But so it was first, Matt on bass or guitar, just having this out on the normal shows I would do, 3 hours in front of a mic at a coffee house, and just and then Mel as she got better and better, and was playing amazing on the saxophone, on the bass, on everything. And then Michaela, my youngest, she played in the Marching Lumberjacks. She played and still plays occasionally with them the Barry sax, and she's barely taller than the Barry sax, so it's hilarious. But and she plays and they all play various ukuleles and such. So anytime I could convince them to come play with me, I definitely did. And I used to always have an old videotape running and to try to capture some of those shows, and that's how. And we have a lot of that up on YouTube. So there's you could go back in time and see different years and years of old recordings. I guess 30 years worth. Wait.
Oh, I'm Wendy Butler, and this is Art Attitude, and I'm with Mike Craghead, and we're talking about his book, other things as well, but his book, Low Art, High Craft and Exquisite Spatulas. So let's go back to the book. Craft, you mentioned this before, and I wanted to talk about this more. Craft versus art, or craft and art, or crafty art, or categorization of art.
Right? You get in the weeds real quick. The divisions, right?
Yeah.
And historically, that division wasn't always there. Like, I guess the Latin term, techne, was art and craft and expertise and wisdom and knowledge. It was a kind of a lot of heavy lifting done by that word. But then at some point, the word for art and craft split. And I don't know if it's that cut and dry, but I'm choosing to believe so because it's easier to think about. And some of that was just because of the way religion sort of took over art in certain times in history, or art movements, or it could, there's a lot of isms involved as well. Like, is at a certain point, craft was branded as women's work and therefore not as important as art, which is men's work. And it was very strictly done that way. So that's all of those divisions are baked into, Western society now. And I think almost all of them are a bummer. Like, almost all of them are not useful. And part of that is, it's because of the structures we've created. The other book I kind of heavily rely on, besides Robert Piercy, is it's called The Painted Word by Tom Wolfe. That was, I read that a little too early in my development. I think I read that in my, I think I was 12 when I first read it. Very short book. And he is empirically a jerk, no question. But he points out that, and at the time he wrote it, 74, I think, he was making fun of contemporary art at the time. And what he realized was, like I was saying earlier, the amount of text required to properly understand any given piece of art, that the story behind it, the theory behind it, overshadowed the art itself, became more important than the art itself. So conceptual art doesn't even need the art. It only needs the concept almost. So he was like, that's silly. And I agree. I think that's weird. And it deeply feels wrong in having experienced what it feels like to make art that resonates with me and with others, and resonating with other people's work. There's something really wrong about having to know too much in order to get anything out of the work. So you can learn more about an artist, about a story, about a movement, and gain a different level of appreciation, just sort of an intellectual appreciation for it, and therefore like it more. But if you need that in order to get anything out of the art, then what are we even doing here, right? That's another piece of it that I've always been it always makes me bristle, is that if we get too caught up in the theory, and the work itself doesn't matter. So that, and I see that as an obstacle again to art and to its acceptance in the world, because in that, there is legitimacy in there, but also in there is something that turns everyone off, especially non-art people. I do talk about the duct tape banana.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, because I just like to say that too. Duct tape banana. You've heard about public art. You talk about that duct tape banana and other works. You seem conflicted about this. I think that's why you write. Maybe that's why you write. That you felt like a hypocrite, and that you're not a fan of duct tape bananas as art pieces, but you are very concerned about gatekeepers, people, telling you, this is art, that is art. You need to see this. So please elaborate on that duct tape.
Well, first and foremost, everybody likes what they like.
Exactly.
because they're tuned how they're tuned. And so, I'm not going to second guess someone else's tuning. That's not my role. That's not anyone's role, arguably. However, um, we have decided to give that role to a lot of sort of institutions, just culturally. So critics, and we defer our personal taste, our own tuning. We defer to experts in some degree there, and because we assume, oh, they know more about art, so they must think this. They think it's important. Therefore, okay, this must be good. But I mean, even in school, I noticed this as well, where something was presented to me that was very, very important, but it's only important in its cultural context and in the context of what the world was like at the time and what it was trying to do. In other words, it was only important because of all the text around it, because of the language around it, because of its theory. But the thing that was being shown to me did nothing for me, and there was no resonance. It's like, well, I'm learning about it. It must be important. So that I always felt that dissonance between where we don't really have room, at least in my experience, all through art education. I personally didn't feel like I had room to include my own personal taste, because my personal taste was irrelevant in the face of history and authorities about art. So again, it's removed from this really personal, resonant, magical experience. So the duct tape banana is I'm also offended by the duct tape banana because it's like it's squandering an opportunity on a hack joke. This is a joke that has been told 1,000 times before by way funnier people, and it's not even it's not even satire, and there's not even poetry in the fact that it's a banana that's going to rot off the wall. I understand ethereal art, right? I carve pumpkins and sand. I get it. But the reason there's poetry in ethereal art is because there was care and something happened. All of this energy was put into the thing itself. So to watch that go away is part of the poetry. This is a banana someone purchased and duct taped to the wall with duct tape they purchased. It is just concept. It is, by definition, this is where conceptual art, that's all it is. It's not the object at all. It doesn't even need to be there. Write down the sentence, haha, a banana duct taped to a wall. That's like the same amount of impact that the doing it is. The point is, by putting it up on the wall, we've given this emphasis to it, and therefore it's art. Well, sure, but also when it's very, very, it's not necessarily public art in that it's still in a museum, and that's sort of the context in which the joke has to live in order to work, or not work. But it's not like a sculpture in a public square. But it got so much press because it's so silly to someone who isn't deeply involved in art and art theory and deeply bought into conceptual art as a concept. We, as an art community or art institution or something, we've allowed that to become the face of our institution. So for the same reason, sometimes a political movement that I really agree with and in favor of, if the marketing is wrong, if the protest is done in a way that is just therapy for the people involved and doesn't reiterate the message, inform people who aren't informed, somehow persuade people who aren't persuaded yet, then we've missed a communication opportunity. And so my beef with the banana is that it yeah, I get it. The guy who did it made a lot of money. You can't be mad at the guy who did it for making a lot of money. It's just a bummer, and I think it makes the world a little worse when art gets into the pop culture in such a easily ridiculable way. And like even when you look at I mentioned Dali. He made fun of art and himself a whole bunch. I didn't talk about Warhol, but it works here too, because they were making fun of art. The difference is there was so much skill and creativity and beauty and resonance in their work somehow. And they were also, the other reason I didn't put Warhol, for instance, in the book, is because he's not a great example of this because he was also making fun of celebrity, which is not the same. You know what I mean? So it's a cleaner and lower hanging fruit to do the banana. But like Banksy, for instance, he's funny. He's a good graphic designer, and he's a very funny political cartoonist. And the way he puts it out into the world, interestingly, with himself as absent as possible. So you can't really resonate with the artist, only the work. So his, you can dismiss his art as propaganda if you want. That's another division you're welcome to make, because again, it's all like sliders on your board here between propaganda and if something has a message. If you go over too far, it feels like too thirsty. You got to go over. It's artistic enough to balance. So yeah,
I think that to add to talking about Banksy or whoever it is, I think that what I've noticed with Banksy art is a listening, a paying attention to what is happening, making a statement about it. People might not like that statement, just like people might not like certain types of creative endeavors, but it doesn't make them not creative endeavors. But the thing that really resonates with me is when I see a piece, whether it's a performance or visual art, that clearly has paid attention to the surroundings and is making a statement, adding to it, somehow elaborating on it.
The fact that we're tribal species and we need community, there's 1,000 different ways, that's expressed. But I think the magic in art is directly tied to that, because the resonance is, yes, it can be by yourself. It can be something you made that resonates, but also that thing, as soon as you show it to someone else, you're in community with that person because you're sharing this experience. And of course, experiencing big art, loud art, like a concert, and I do use art and entertainment interchangeably, because I think that division is silly as well. There's bad entertainment, there's bad art, there's good, both. You can't say this movie is so great that now it's art. Well, you can say this movie is great because it resonates for XYZ reason. But again, the label, how useful is this label except as a marketing tool? So I think community is what we're genetically kind of wired for. And that magic I'm talking about in art it's what we feel when the community that we get and that we need is working. So like that feeling you get if you're feeling something in a church, if you're feeling something at a concert, that feeling of community is resonance with whatever. The thing that we're resonating with may or may not be art, but in it's the same juice, I'm convinced, because it feels the same. So that's why I leapt to that conclusion. It's not based on any science, for sure. But yeah, the community aspect of art, not just the literal part of it, but that's I think deep down the same stuff, the same magic I'm talking about, and which also the thing that really made the book work for me. Like at first it was just, God, I keep saying these annoying things over and over again. I should write them down so I don't have to keep saying them. But what I realized, and the thing that brought it together, because this is the conversation in my own head, and that I've inflicted upon others, and again, apologies, for decades. What I figured out more recently was, like I've done a lot of technical things as well that aren't art. So I know how to weld a little bit that I learned in school, but I also have a welder at home that I do, various projects with, or I build things all the time. I have like a downdraft table that I can power carve in that sucks down the dust. So the problem solving involved in all of that. I've done web development stuff. There's things that are very technical that I've been involved in, but so I'm tuned to appreciate some of those things. So if I see a really good welding job, the example in the book is I walk by a really good welding job and I know just enough about welding to go, wow, that's a really good welding job. And I feel I appreciate that. I walked past that and I went to get a coffee at Ramon's, and it was art on the walls, and I know how to paint pictures. So what I'm seeing is not how did they magically do this thing? It's I know what tools they used and this is what they did with them. And I looked at that and I went, wow, that's really cool. And I realized that appreciation, that quieter appreciation, it wasn't bringing me to tears like a concert will, or a theater or something louder, but that quieter feeling of appreciation that I got from the weld and the painting was identical. Like the levels are different sometimes, but so what I realized in that moment, if you look around and you're tuned to any of it and you make an effort to try to find it, you can see that almost every human endeavor, including very much the things we don't consider to be artistic or creative, the people deeply involved in that who really care about it, who love what they do and are really, really good at it, that thing they get, that satisfaction from that is the same juice we get from art. So, and then when I realized that, so like if you're a welder, the satisfaction the welder gets is going to be similar to the satisfaction I get when I make good art that I like. And obviously me understanding just enough about welding to appreciate a weld, that's the same thing too. So extrapolate that again, look at a really good baseball game where you're in community with a whole bunch of people. The emotion is undeniable, some of the stuff that can happen in a baseball game. And the warm, fuzzy feelings we can get there, we can get it in watching the Olympics, anything, certainly in churches and concerts, but anything, even like a political rally. The magic that's in art can exist in any other thing, any other human endeavor that's not necessarily artistic. Just anything we do with love and care and skill and we pour ourselves into, that resonance and that magic can exist there too. So one of the biggest things about the book is, wow, so if that's the case, and again, smarter people than me can pick this apart and do a better job at it. But if that's the case, then maybe there's opportunity for this resonance everywhere. And that's a really unifying thing that maybe makes the world a little better if we could look at it that way.
Thank you to Mike Craghead. Low Art, High Craft and Exquisite Spatulas is available at Northtown Books in Arcata and Booklegger in Eureka. You can find out more about the book and myriad links for print, audio, and ebook formats by going to mikecraghead.com or lowarthighcraft.com. I'm Wendy Butler for Art Attitude.